now let us see how to do cache writes. So there are again cache write hits and cache write misses. There are different ways of working this out. Let us see how to do that. So now basically if you have, let us look at this diagram here. You have a processor, you have a cache, and you have a memory here. So I'm trying to write something to the memory. So first thing is, let us write it first to the cache because it is closer to the processor. You don't have to invest too much time to write. So again, you follow the same policy. You see if the line is present in the cache. So you first check for the valid bit. If it is valid, then you check for a tag match. If the tag matches, then it means that the address, the data corresponding to that address is present. So you send out an address, you do a search for the valid bit, then you search for a tag match. If it matches, then that line is present in the cache. So now I want to write the data. So let's say my data is AP. So there is already some other data here in the cache, which was the previously written data. So now I'm going to change that data and then update it with the new data, which is AB. So now, if you notice here, there is a small problem here because you have just updated this location 00 in the cache, whereas finally you have to update it in the memory. So at some point in time, you have to update that in the memory because memory is the golden reference to us. The memory has to be finally updated. So there are two reasons. One is, of course, memory is a golden reference. The next is, let's say I will evict this line at some point in time. Let's say I get uh, another address which is mapping to the same index. So which means I'm going to evict this AB and this tag and then replace it with some other data. Let's say it is the data corresponding to 0x10. So now what will happen to this earlier data? 00 had, if I remember, it was AB. So that has not been updated in memory and memory contains a stale or old data. Therefore, always the rule is that the cache and the memory have to have the same data in that memory location. You can't have two different datas. So that brings us to this notion of different types of writing to the cache. So if I go to this diagram again, so when the processor writes into the cache, it can choose to write into the memory at the same time. So basically when you write into address 00, when I write AB, I can write it in the cache and I can also write it in the memory at the same time. Or what I can also do is I can just write it in the cache and then make a note of the fact that I have not updated it in the memory. So I will say not updated in memory. And then finally, when I have to evict this line, let's say a new line comes in, and I have to knock off this AB. That is when I will write back to the memory. So then before evicting that line, I will update the memory and then I will bring this new line into the cache. So this brings us to two types of writes. One is called write through. Write through means I always update the cache and the next level of the memory hierarchy. So basically, if I have P, C, and M, I'm going to update the cache as well as the memory at the same time. This is going to be slow because till I write to the memory, I cannot proceed with the next instruction. So I have a store and then I have another add and a load. I'm stuck with load because I'm still updating the cache and the memory. But the advantage is the data is always consistent between the cache and the memory. So how do I prevent this slower memory access is I can also do an alternate thing. I can put some buffer here. I can put a buffer. I write to the cache and then write to the buffer and ask the buffer to write it to memory. And while the buffer is writing to memory, the processor can go back and start its next instruction. So this kind of a method is called write through with buffer. So the first one is just called write through, where I update both cache and memory. If I put a buffer in between, it's called write through uh, with buffer. Of course, if the buffer is full, you will have to wait, but otherwise it will go through. Now the other method I mentioned is I update the cache and I do not update the memory. So in order to keep track of this, what I will do is I'll introduce one more bit called dirty bit. If the dirty bit is 1, it means that I have updated, I have done a write to this cache, but I have not updated it to the memory. So what this means is next time when I'm evicting this line because I get a new line, I'm going to first see the dirty bit. If the dirty bit is 1, I'm going to first write the data back to the memory to make it consistent. And then I will evict this line and bring in the new line. So the advantage here is performance is improved because you are just writing to the cache. You're not going to write to the memory or to the buffer. But the small disadvantage is there is an additional dirty bit which is going to take up some space. But this is a good methodology used by most modern caches. So there is also another policy. What do you do on a cache write miss? So I'm trying to write to the cache, but the line does not exist in the cache. So what do you do in this case? So if it's a miss, then usually if it was a read, you would do is you would go to the memory, fetch the data, put it in the cache, and then bring it to the processor. That was for the read. Now for the write, if it is a miss, so what you would do, you would probably do the same thing. You would go to the memory. Um, you would not go to the memory, but then you would fetch the line, which means that you have 0x00. Then you would uh, go to the memory, and then you can update the memory directly. So I want to write AB into 00. So I can just update the memory and forget it because it is a miss anyway in the cache, it's not present. So I can go to the memory and then update it. That is called miss no allocate, which means that the cache line is not allocated. You don't update anything in the cache, the store directly goes to the memory. The other is misallocate, which means I allocate the line in the cache. So 0x00, you have to evict something from the cache. You bring in that line and then update that line. You write to that line and then update the dirty bit uh, if you're doing a uh, write back cache. So this is what is usually followed: a write back cache with a write misallocate and a write through with no allocate. So this is a combination which is generally preferred. So that's all I have for caches, and we can discuss this in our lecture.